There are moments in a life when the architecture of everything you believe in shifts on its foundation, not with a crash, but with a quiet, terrifying slide into silence. I used to think love was a structure you built, brick by brick, something solid that could withstand the weather if the mortar was mixed correctly, if the plans were followed with precision. I am an architect by trade, and I applied that same logic to my marriage, believing that if I managed the load-bearing walls of communication and trust with enough care, the roof would never leak. But I was 37 years old when I learned that some storms do not care about your blueprints, and that the person standing beside you in the rain might feel like a stranger, even when you know the shape of their hands better than your own. The night it happened, the night I begged a man I thought was a stranger to hold me, I was standing outside a hotel in Seattle, the rain coming down in sheets that felt less like water and more like gravity, pulling me toward the pavement. I had left my own home hours before, unable to sit within the walls that held too many memories of a life that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know who he was when I first spoke to him. I didn't look up. I just knew I was breaking, and I needed something solid to lean against, something human to prove I hadn't vanished entirely into the cold. I said the words before I could stop them, my voice cracking under the weight of weeks of swallowed tears. Hold me just for a second. It was a plea stripped of pride, a raw admission of defeat from a woman who prided herself on never needing rescue. And he did. He stepped out of the shadows of the awning, and he wrapped his arms around me, and for a moment, the world stopped spinning long enough for me to breathe. It was only when I pulled back, when the rain washed the blur from my eyes, that I saw the face I had sworn I was done with. It was Julian. My husband, the man I was in the process of divorcing, the billionaire who I thought had chosen his empire over me. And in that single second of recognition, the misunderstanding that had driven us apart didn't shatter with a scream, but with a quiet, devastating clarity that would change everything between us. To understand why I was standing in the rain begging my husband for comfort as if he were a stranger, you have to understand the silence that grew between us. It wasn't the loud silence of a fight, the kind where dishes are thrown and voices are raised until the neighbors knock on the wall. It was the quiet silence of two people working in adjacent rooms, speaking in emails, leaving notes on the counter, existing in the same house but living in different time zones. Julian was a man who built things too, but where I built spaces for people to live, he built systems for people to use. He was in tech, a visionary who had started something in a garage and turned it into a conglomerate that touched nearly every aspect of digital life. We met when I was 30, fresh out of a master's program and hungry to prove that design could be functional without losing its soul. He was 35, already wealthy but still working 80-hour weeks, driven by a need to secure a future he was too busy to enjoy. I loved his intensity. I loved the way his mind worked, how he could see the solution to a problem before anyone else had finished stating the issue. I thought that intensity was focused on us, on building a life. But over time, I began to feel like I was just another project on his dashboard, something to be optimized, protected, and managed, but not necessarily felt. The wealth came slowly at first, then all at once. An IPO, an acquisition, a surge in stock value that turned our comfortable life into one of extreme privilege. We moved to a house in the hills that looked out over the Sound, a place of glass and steel that I designed myself, thinking that if I built the perfect home, he would finally come home to me. But the house became a museum of our absence. He was traveling more. The board meetings, the investor calls, the crises in markets I didn't understand. He started missing dinners. Then he started missing weekends. And then he started missing the moments that mattered. The breaking point wasn't a single event, but an accumulation of small absences that added up to a void. It was my birthday, a milestone year, 37. I had planned a quiet dinner, just the two of us, no staff, no assistants, just us and the wine I had saved for a special occasion. I waited. I watched the clock. I reheated the food twice. He didn't come home until 3 in the morning, and when he did, he smelled like airport lounge and stress. He didn't apologize. He just walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and told me there was a situation with a merger that required his immediate attention in London. He said it like it was a fact of nature, like rain or gravity, something neither of us could control. I looked at him, standing there in his suit that cost more than my first car, and I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I told him I was leaving. I told him I couldn't be married to a ghost. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked like pain, but it was gone before I could name it. He nodded. He said he understood. He said he would have his lawyer draw up the papers. And just like that, the man who was supposed to be my partner became the adversary in a legal negotiation. I moved out the next week. I took a rental in the city, something smaller, something warm, something that didn't echo when I walked across the floor. I told my friends I was fine. I told my family it was mutual. I told myself that I was choosing clarity over anger, that I was removing myself from a situation that was draining my spirit. But at night, when the city lights blinked outside my window and the silence of the room pressed against my ears, I wondered if I had made a mistake. I wondered if I had pushed him away because I was afraid of being secondary to his work, or if he had pushed me away because he thought work was the only way to protect me. The separation lasted for 4 months. 4 months of living like strangers who shared a bank account and a history. We communicated through attorneys. It was sterile, efficient, and utterly devoid of the humanity that had once defined us. I focused on my work. I took on a new project, a community center in a part of the city that needed revitalization. I threw myself into the concrete and the steel, into the measurements and the materials, because those things made sense. They followed rules. People did not. Julian's name was everywhere. I couldn't open a business journal without seeing his face. He was being hailed as a genius, a savior of the industry. There were rumors, of course. There are always rumors when a marriage collapses in the public eye. People whispered that he was seeing someone else, that the distance was because his heart had moved on. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I had decided that my peace was more important than the truth. I hired a private investigator, not to catch him in a lie, but to ensure my own assets were secure. I am a practical woman. I knew that in a divorce involving that level of wealth, emotions could cloud judgment. I needed facts. I needed to know where I stood so I could negotiate from a place of strength, not vulnerability. The reports came back clean. No other women, no secret accounts, just work. Endless, consuming work, but there were anomalies, small things. He had purchased a property near my rental, though he never went there. He had increased the security detail on my building, though he told his lawyers it was standard procedure for all his holdings. He had donated a significant sum to the community center I was designing, anonymously. I saw the donation in the public records. I stared at the name of the foundation, a shell company I recognized from his early days. It was a gesture that contradicted the coldness of our legal correspondence. It suggested that he was watching. It suggested that he cared. But care without communication is just surveillance, and I wasn't sure if I could tolerate being watched by a man who wouldn't speak to me. I tried to maintain my boundaries. I told myself that the donation was a tax write-off, that the security was liability management, that the property was an investment. I built walls of logic around my heart to keep the hope from leaking back in. Hope is dangerous when you are trying to let go. It keeps you tethered to a pain you are trying to outrun. So I worked. I spent late nights at the office, reviewing schematics, meeting with contractors, ensuring that every beam was placed exactly where it needed to be. I wanted to build something that would last, something that would serve people long after I was gone. Maybe I was trying to prove that I could create legacy without him. Maybe I was trying to prove that I was enough on my own. But the exhaustion was catching up to me. The emotional labor of holding myself together, of presenting a face of calm competence to the world while inside I was grieving the loss of my best friend, was wearing me down. I started sleeping less. I started eating less. I walked through my days in a fog, performing the actions of living without feeling the substance of it. And then came the night of the storm. It was a Tuesday. I had been at the site all day, dealing with a delay in the steel delivery, arguing with a supplier who didn't understand the specifications. I was tired. My head was pounding. I had received a call from my attorney earlier that day telling me that Julian was agreeing to every term I had proposed. He wasn't fighting for the house. He wasn't fighting for the art. He was just signing. It should have felt like a victory. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like confirmation that I was no longer worth fighting for. If he loved me, wouldn't he have contested something? Wouldn't he have tried to keep us tied together in some way? His compliance felt like abandonment. It felt like he was erasing me from his life as efficiently as he deleted old code. I left the office early. I couldn't stand the sight of the blueprints, the lines that promised structure when I felt so chaotic. I drove without destination. The rain started as a drizzle and quickly turned into a deluge, the kind of Pacific Northwest rain that soaks through your coat and settles in your bones. I found myself downtown, near the hotel where we had spent our anniversary 5 years ago. I don't know why I went there. Maybe I was drawn to the memory of who we used to be. I parked the car and sat there for a while, watching the wipers swipe back and forth, clearing the view only to have it blur again. I felt a panic rising in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. It was the feeling of being trapped, not by walls but by circumstances. I got out of the car. I needed air. I needed to feel something other than this numbness. I walked toward the hotel entrance, but I didn't go inside. I stood under the awning, watching the people rush by, umbrellas blooming like black flowers in the dark. They were going somewhere. They had places to be. I was just standing there, suspended in the in-between. A man was standing near the pillar, smoking a cigarette. He was wearing a dark coat, a cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like anyone, a businessman waiting for a car, a traveler killing time. I didn't look at him closely. I didn't want to engage. I just wanted to exist in the same space as another human being without having to perform. The cold was biting now. I was shivering, but I didn't move. The tears started then, unexpected and violent. They weren't the quiet tears of sadness. They were the ragged sobs of grief, the kind that shake your shoulders and make you feel like you are coming apart at the seams. I tried to stop them. I tried to breathe, but the dam had broken. All the months of holding it together, of being the strong one, the rational one, the architect who could fix anything, it all collapsed. I heard the cigarette drop. I heard the crunch of it under a shoe. Then I felt a presence beside me. The man had moved closer. He didn't speak. He just stood there, offering a silent solidarity. And that was when I broke. I turned toward him, my vision blurred by rain and tears, and I reached out. I didn't think. I didn't consider the consequences. I just needed contact. I needed to know that I was real. Hold me just for a second. The words fell out of me, desperate and quiet. I expected him to pull away. I expected him to call security. I expected him to treat me like a crazy woman bothering a stranger in the rain. Instead, he stepped in. He opened his coat and pulled me into him. He was warm, solid. He smelled like sandalwood and rain. It was a scent that triggered a memory so deep it almost knocked me off my feet, but I was too lost in the relief of the embrace to analyze it. He held me tightly, one hand on the back of my head, shielding me from the wind, the other around my waist, anchoring me to the earth. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He didn't try to fix it. He just held me. And in that hold, I felt a safety I hadn't realized I was starving for. It was the safety of being known. Even if he was a stranger, he was holding me like he knew exactly how much weight I was carrying. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the city noise fading into a hum, the rain washing over us. I began to calm. The shaking stopped. The panic receded. And then the instinct to identify kicked in. I needed to know who had saved me from drowning on dry land. I pulled back slightly. I looked up. The streetlight above us flickered, casting a yellow glow on his face. He took off his cap, and there he was, Julian. The shock didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It hit me like a slow realization, a dawning horror and relief all at once. His hair was wet. His eyes were red-rimmed, matching my own. He looked older than he had 4 months ago. There were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. He didn't let go of me immediately. He kept his hands on my arms, grounding me as I processed the truth. He wasn't a stranger. He had been following me. Or maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe he was just there. Maybe he knew I came here. Maybe he had been waiting. The questions flooded my mind, but I didn't ask them. I just stared at him. He looked back at me, and for the first time in months, I saw the vulnerability he had been hiding. The stoic billionaire mask was gone. In its place was a man who was just as tired, just as broken, just as afraid as I was. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was rough, unused. "I'm so sorry, Amya, I didn't know what to say." The anger I had been nurturing, the righteous indignation that had fueled my decision to leave, it evaporated. "You were watching me," I said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. He nodded. "I needed to know you were safe. I needed to know you were eating. I needed to know you weren't alone." "But you were alone," I said. "You made me alone." He flinched. "I know. I know I did. And that is why I didn't come closer. I didn't think I had the right." We stood there in the rain, two people who loved each other too much to know how to be together, separated by a misunderstanding that had grown into a canyon. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to maintain the boundary I had set for myself, but my body remembered him. My heart remembered him, and the truth was, I didn't want to be anywhere else. "Why didn't you fight for me?" I asked. The question had been burning in my throat for months. "Why did you just sign the papers? Why did you let me go so easily?" He looked down at his hands. He looked like he was searching for the right words, the right code to explain the error. "Because I thought it was what you needed," he said finally. I thought I was the problem. I thought my life, my work, the pressure. I thought it was poisoning you. I saw how tired you were. I saw how much you hated the silence in the house. I thought if I removed myself from the equation, you would be free. You would be happy." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were wet. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, Amya. I left because I loved you enough to let you go if that's what it took to save you." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was the exact opposite of what I had believed. I had thought his compliance was indifference. I had thought his silence was abandonment, but it was sacrifice. He had been protecting me from himself. He had been trying to shield me from the chaos of his world, even if it meant breaking his own heart. It was a noble thought. It was a stupid thought. It was the kind of decision a man makes when he thinks he knows what's best for everyone else, but forgets to ask them what they want. "You don't get to decide that for me," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "You don't get to decide what I can handle. You don't get to decide what makes me happy. That is my choice. Not yours." "I know," he said. "I know that now. I was wrong. I was so wrong." He reached out and touched my face, his thumb brushing away a raindrop that had settled on my cheek. The touch was electric. It sent a current through me that woke up every dormant nerve. "I missed you," I whispered. The admission was terrifying. It gave him power. It gave him the ability to hurt me again, but I said it anyway, because it was the truth. "I missed you every day. I missed your laugh. I missed the way you drink your coffee. I missed the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." He closed his eyes. "I missed you too, more than you know, more than I can say." We stood there for a long time, the rain slowing to a drizzle. The moment of crisis had passed, but the work was just beginning. A hug in the rain doesn't fix a marriage. It doesn't erase months of silence. It doesn't undo the legal papers that were sitting on a desk waiting for signatures. But it was a start. It was the crack in the wall where the light could get in. We went inside the hotel. We didn't go to a room. We went to the lobby bar, a quiet corner where we could talk without shouting. We ordered coffee. We sat across from each other, the table between us acting as a buffer, a safe zone. I told him everything. I told him about the loneliness. I told him about the rumors I had heard and how they had eaten at me. I told him about the fear that I was just a line item in his budget. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. And then he told me his side. He told me about the pressure from the board. He told me about the lawsuit that had been threatened against the company, a lawsuit that could have implicated me personally because of our joint assets. He had been working tirelessly to settle it quietly, to protect me from being dragged into the media circus. He hadn't told me because he didn't want me to worry. He thought he was handling it. He thought he was being a hero. But in trying to protect me from the storm, he had left me out in the rain. It was a classic misunderstanding. He was acting out of love, but his method was control. He was trying to manage the risk, and I was the risk he was trying to mitigate. I looked at him across the table, and I saw the flaw in his logic. You can't manage a relationship like a business, Julian. You can't mitigate the risk of love. If you try to protect me from everything, you protect me from living. And I don't want to be safe. I want to be with you. He nodded slowly. I understand, I do, but I don't know how to stop. It's who I am. It's how I operate. Then you have to learn, I said. You have to learn that I am not an asset to be protected. I am a partner. And partners share the burden, even the heavy ones. Especially the heavy ones. The conversation lasted for hours. The sun started to come up, casting a gray light through the windows. We were exhausted, but for the first time in months, I felt clear. The fog had lifted. I knew where I stood. I knew where he stood. And I knew that the distance between us was bridgeable, but only if we both walked toward the middle. I couldn't just wait for him to change. He couldn't just expect me to understand his silence. We had to build a new structure, one that could withstand the weather, one that had windows that opened so the air could circulate. I told him I wasn't signing the papers. Not yet. I needed time. I needed to see that he could change. I needed to see that he could let me in. He agreed. He said he would halt the legal proceedings. He said he would talk to his board. He said he would prioritize us. It sounded like a promise. I hoped it was more than that. We left the hotel separately. I needed space to process. I needed to go home and think. I drove back to my rental, the city waking up around me. The streets were wet, reflecting the lights of the buildings. I felt different. I felt lighter. The weight of the misunderstanding was gone. It had been replaced by the weight of responsibility. Reconciliation is hard. It is harder than leaving. Leaving is a single act. Staying is a daily choice. You have to choose each other every morning. You have to choose to trust when you are afraid. You have to choose to speak when you want to hide. I walked into my apartment and took off my wet coat. I hung it up. I made a cup of tea. I sat by the window and watched the city. I thought about Julian. I thought about the way he had held me. I thought about the truth he had shared. I realized that I had judged him based on my own fears. I had assumed the worst because I was afraid of being hurt. I had protected myself by pushing him away, just as he had protected himself by pushing me away. We were both guilty of the same thing. We were both trying to control the outcome instead of living in the moment. The next few weeks were a period of negotiation, not legally, but emotionally. We started seeing a therapist. Together. It was awkward at first. Sitting in a room with a stranger and dissecting our failures. But it was necessary. We needed a mediator, someone to translate our languages. I spoke in feelings. He spoke in solutions. The therapist helped us find the common ground. We learned to listen without formulating a response. We learned to validate each other's pain without trying to fix it immediately. Julian learned that when I was upset, I didn't need a solution. I needed to be heard. I learned that when Julian was quiet, it wasn't always abandonment. Sometimes it was processing. Sometimes he was trying to find the right words and needed time. We established new rules. No work after 8 p.m. No phones at the dinner table. Weekly check-ins where we discussed not just the logistics of our lives, but the state of our hearts. It was strategic. It was deliberate. It was the only way we knew how to love each other. We had to apply our professional skills to our personal lives. We had to treat the relationship like the most important project we would ever work on. And in many ways, it was. The wealth was still there. The business was still demanding. But the dynamic had shifted. Julian started delegating more. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations. He made space. He came to the community center site. He wore a hard hat. He got his boots dirty. He didn't try to manage the contractors. He just watched me work. He saw me in my element. And I saw him letting go of the control. It was beautiful to watch. It was the physical manifestation of his trust. He was trusting me to handle the stress. He was trusting us to handle the life. There were setbacks. Of course there were. Old habits die hard. There were nights when he came home late. There were days when I felt the old insecurity creeping in. But we had the tools now. We had the communication. When I felt afraid, I told him. I didn't withdraw. I said, I feel insecure today. I need reassurance. And he gave it. He didn't get defensive. He didn't tell me I was being irrational. He held me. He told me I was loved. When he felt overwhelmed, he told me. He said, I am struggling with this decision. I need some space to think. And I gave it. I didn't take it personally. I understood that it wasn't about me. It was about his process. We were learning to dance together again. The rhythm was different. It was slower, more intentional, but it was ours. The divorce papers sat in a drawer unsigned. They were a reminder of how close we had come to the edge. They were a warning. But they were not our future. Our future was being built in the small moments. The morning coffee, the evening walk, the quiet conversations on the couch, the way he looked at me now. It wasn't the look of a man managing a problem. It was the look of a man who had found something precious and was afraid to lose it again. And I looked at him with the same reverence. I had almost lost him. I had almost let pride and fear steal the best thing in my life. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. 6 months after the night in the rain, we went back to the hotel. Not to the lobby, to the room. We booked the suite where we had spent our anniversary. We wanted to reclaim the memory. We wanted to overwrite the pain with something new. We arrived in the evening. The city was sparkling below us. The room was quiet. We stood by the window, looking out at the view. It was the same view we had seen 5 years ago, but we were different people. We were stronger. We were wiser. We had been through the fire and come out the other side. Julian turned to me. He took my hands in his. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me. Then he said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on me. For demanding the truth. For choosing clarity over anger." I smiled. I couldn't help it. "I chose you, Julian. I always chose you. I just needed to know you were choosing me too." "I am," he said. "I am choosing you. Every day. For the rest of my life." He pulled me close. He held me. It wasn't the desperate hold of the night in the rain. It was a confident hold. A promise. I rested my head on his chest. I listened to his heartbeat. It was steady. Strong. It was the rhythm of our future. I closed my eyes. I felt safe. Not because he was protecting me from the world, but because I knew we could face the world together. I knew that if the storm came again, we wouldn't hide from it. We would stand in it, and we would hold on to each other. The journey to reconciliation was not a straight line. It was a series of choices. It was the choice to be vulnerable when I wanted to be strong. It was the choice to be patient when I wanted to be right. It was the choice to believe in love even when the evidence suggested otherwise. I learned that trust is not something you have. It is something you build. It is something you maintain. It requires work. It requires intelligence. It requires the willingness to see the other person not as an obstacle, but as a partner. Julian learned that too. He learned that his wealth and power could not buy him peace. He learned that the only thing that mattered was the person standing beside him. He learned that he didn't have to carry the world on his shoulders. He could share the load. And in sharing it, he found that it was lighter. We found that we were stronger together than we ever were apart. The misunderstanding had nearly destroyed us, but it had also forced us to examine the foundations of our relationship. It had forced us to tear down the walls we had built and rebuild them with better materials. We were no longer the people we were when we got married. We were better. We were real, and that was enough. I think about that night in the rain often. I think about the moment I begged a stranger to hold me. It feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like a different woman, but I am grateful for her. I am grateful for her pain, because it led me here. It led me to the truth. It led me back to him. If I hadn't broken, I wouldn't have let him in. If I hadn't asked for help, I wouldn't have found the answer. Sometimes you have to hit the bottom to find the ground you can stand on. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what you actually need. I needed Julian, not the billionaire, not the CEO, just Julian, the man who smells like sandalwood, the man who works too hard, the man who loves me in his own complicated way. And he needed me. He needed someone to remind him that he was human. He needed someone to love him for who he was, not what he had. We saved each other. Not by fixing each other, but by accepting each other, by seeing the flaws and loving them anyway, by choosing to stay. The story of us is not a fairy tale. There are no magic wands. There are no easy fixes. There is only the work. There is only the commitment. There is only the daily decision to love. But it is a good story. It is a true story. And it is ours. I look at Julian now, sitting across from me at the breakfast table, reading the news on his tablet. He looks up and catches me watching him. He smiles. It's a small smile, but it reaches his eyes. I smile back. We don't need to say anything. We know what we have. We know what it cost. And we know what it's worth. The sun is coming through the window. It's a new day. The weather is clear. The sky is blue, and I am holding his hand under the table, just for a second, just to feel the connection, just to know that he is there. And he squeezes my hand. He knows. He understands. We are whole, we are healed, and we are ready for whatever comes next. There is a power in forgiveness. It is not the power of forgetting. It is the power of releasing the debt. I released Julian from the debt of his silence. He released me from the debt of my expectations. We cleared the ledger. We started fresh. And in that freshness, we found a joy that was deeper than the happiness we had before. The happiness before was naive. It was based on the assumption that things would always be easy. The happiness now is earned. It is based on the knowledge that things can be hard and we can survive them. It is a resilient happiness. It is a mature happiness. It is the kind of happiness that lasts. I recommend it to anyone. I recommend the work. I recommend the truth. I recommend the clarity. It is worth it. Love is worth it, even when it hurts, even when it scares you, even when you think you are begging a stranger for comfort. Because sometimes the stranger is just the person you love, waiting for you to see them again, waiting for you to look up, waiting for you to say, "Hold me." And when you do, when you finally let yourself be held, you realize that you were never alone. You were just lost in the rain. And now you are home. The architecture of a life is not static. It changes. It settles. It requires maintenance. I used to think that if I built it right, it would stand forever. Now I know that nothing stands forever without care. You have to check the foundations. You have to repair the cracks. You have to reinforce the walls. But if you do the work, if you put in the effort, the structure will hold. It will shelter you. It will keep you warm. My marriage is that structure. It is built on truth. It is built on communication. It is built on the willingness to be vulnerable. It is not perfect, but it is sound, and it is mine, and it is his. And that is all that matters. I am Amya. I am 37 years old. I am an architect, and I am a wife, and I am loved. And that is the greatest design of all. The rain has stopped. The sun is out. And I am standing here in the light, holding the hand of the man who turned out to be everything I needed. Not a stranger, not a billionaire, just my husband, just Julian, and I will never let go. Not again, not ever, because I know now what it costs to be apart, and I know what it means to be together, and I choose together, I choose him, I choose us, every second, every day, for the rest of my life. This is the resolution, this is the truth. This is the story, and it is beautiful.